going to build the biggest bridge in the world, the bridge that will take us to the Stanford. We're going to have the possibility to hear that what Stanford Biodesign process for effective pediatric innovation implementation looks like. So please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Dr. Janene Fuerch, Associate Professor of Neonatal-Perinatal Medicine at Stanford Children's Hospital.
Thanks, everyone. It is truly a pleasure to be here and join you all from California. I have never been to Poland before, so this is an amazing place, and just want to thank everyone who's put together this wonderful event. There's never a day that I love more than I get to talk about pediatric innovation, because first and foremost, I'm a practicing neonatologist, and so innovation for my patients is truly important. And secondly, I'm also an innovator, entrepreneur, teacher, researcher, and on and on. So they wanted me to talk today a little bit about the Stanford Biodesign process. So just a hand raised, who has ever heard of Stanford Biodesign or Biodesign? Lots of you, great, awesome. I love those hands raising over there too. I see all of you. And I know that some of you use it in teaching your own courses or fellowships as well. So we're going to take it back to basics. And I am here today to not necessarily talk about the barriers, which I can talk about all day, because I have done pediatric innovation myself. I have had companies acquired in the pediatric space, and it is hard, but it is also possible. So we're going to talk about how to actually do it and how we've been helping companies all around the world do it over and over and over again. So of course I have disclosures because I'm part of companies or consult for companies. And if you don't know what Stanford Biodesign was, which I know many of you do, we are a group that advances health outcomes and equity through innovation education, translation, and also changing policy, which I know we talked about a little bit about before, is a really important thing to make sure that the entire ecosystem is truly there. Now, in our fellowships, in our classes, we're not necessarily trying to make people produce companies, which is a little bit strange, right? But we are trying to produce the next generation of health tech leaders who then go on to make companies. But of course, a byproduct of that are companies. So there's been over 52 companies that have come out of the Stanford Biodesign program in the last 20 years that was initially started by Drs. Paul Yock and Josh Mackauer, a serial entrepreneur, if you've heard of those names before. So over the last 20 years, this number's probably gone up since this slide was last updated, but helped over 9.4 million patients, which is probably the most important impact metric that we can actually think of. But guess how many of these patients are pediatric patients? Up until 2 years ago, there were 14,000 of these patients, which is really atrocious, right? The process selected out pediatric companies. Anytime any VC hears the word pediatrics, they smile, turn around, and walk away. We know how that goes. But we've really changed this process, and we've really changed this by introducing a different program and a mechanism that we call Impact One, which you'll hear about today. And I don't think I have to convince any of you of this, because all the wonderful presentations before today already have. But just something to think about and put in your head, that industry truly spends more money to develop health technologies that address the last month of life than on technologies that can transform a lifetime. And that's really sad. And it's really sad when you're a neonatologist who cares deeply about your patients. But if you don't believe that, I know that you've seen some of this data before, you can believe what the FDA puts out. So guess which line is pediatric approvals? The blue one or the green one? We all know it's the green one. And the secret about this data is that these companies that have gotten pediatric approval from 2008 to 2016 are flat, they're not accelerating, and they mostly address patients 18 to 21 years of age, which are considered pediatric by the FDA. Now, a 21-year-old is not the same as my 450-gram, 23-week preemie, and they have very different needs, both that day and as they grow over time. So coming back to the whole idea, how does this process actually happen? And I know that we've assumed that most people know how innovation happens, but I'm just going to take a step back and realize all of this has a US bend to it. So if it's different in your own entities, don't take that differently. But how do you really move? And physicians often wonder this all the time and ask me all the time, how do you move from an idea to a product used in patient care? Because having ideas are really easy, but actually executing that is very challenging, and that's where it comes in. So we use medical devices every day if you're in healthcare, but we never think about how they get there. We don't think about the fact that every single device, whether it is small, simple, or very complex, requires a market analysis, a business plan, a sustainable business that can continue to produce devices, as well as a regulatory pathway, reimbursement. They have to get paid for it. You have to have an engineering team. You have to have a quality system, and the list goes on. And this takes time, and it has to be really thoughtful. And it has to be really thoughtful when you're innovating for adults, but it has to be even more thoughtful and precise when you're innovating for pediatric patients, because the cliffs that you can fall off in pediatrics and maternal health are, there's a multitude of them. It can happen all the time. So most technologies, especially coming out of an academic environment, come from a technology push. So a brilliant scientist comes up with a technology, and then they go looking around, where can we apply this in as many places as possible? And that works a lot for academia, but it doesn't necessarily work for innovation in healthcare. So the way that we approach this at Stanford Biodesign is truly needs-based innovation. So we take a need, really understand that need. And if you've ever done the process, you think you understand the need, and then you think you understand the need, and then you think you understand it, and I'll still tell you you don't understand it, which can be really frustrating. But we truly understand those needs. And then the technology actually is much easier to develop because you already understand the parameters around that. And there are 3 stages to the Stanford Biodesign process. This looks very linear and nice and fluid, but really it's very iterative and messy in practice. So identify is identifying the clinical need, doing needs finding and needs screening. Inventing, which everybody loves, is inventing the disruptive technology and screening those concepts against all of the filters that we have, including intellectual property, regulatory, reimbursement, business model, et cetera. And then the process that goes on for quite a long time is the implementation, creating a viable business. So we're talking a lot about medical technology here, but this applies to engineerable biotech and other things as well. But we do believe in creating a sustainable business so that you can actually get those returns back to your investor, and that you can stay alive and not just based on philanthropy. So now into some examples. So here we have, this is a company that eventually ended up being Neonatal, which I'll tell you about, but adult central line management, right? You guys have seen this before. It's protective, it's standardized, it's simple. There's a company that develops this. We want to make sure that lines that go centrally into the bodies of our patients are protected because they're at very high risk for infection. And that is the standard of care in neonatology. This is non-standardized tape that a nurse puts together in an art project to hold the most important lifelines into my 23-week preemies and sometimes 22-week preemies that is exposed, and right there's the diaper. So you can imagine that these lines have the highest rate of infection in the hospital anywhere. And this should be appalling to us, that we allow this to happen to our patients. But we don't anymore, so. Just a little bit about umbilical lines to give you guys a little bit of background. They're actually pretty easy to put in as far as lines go. They can take a couple of minutes. They go in through the umbilicus, through an artery and a vein, and they can instantly provide life-sustaining therapies for the patients. Most of the time, these babies, they need glucose immediately and other things, and their veins are, as you can imagine, when they're about 400 grams, are quite difficult to access. So this is the place that we're able to access everything, and you can monitor blood pressure and everything. And it's really painless, so we like that in pediatrics as well, and probably in all fields. But umbilical catheters are often removed anywhere between 3 to 14 days because we're worried about infection. Not because they going to get infected, but because we're worried about them in the way that we currently do our lines. So the company that eventually came up with this, of which, for full disclosure, I was the medical director for and continue to work for, they came up with a needs statement. And this is the core of the biodesign process. And it seems really simple, but it's actually pretty challenging for anyone who's done it. And Polyak will tell you that a well-defined need is the DNA of a great invention. So you prototype it. And the way that these need statements go is a way to blank a problem in a population in order to affect a certain outcome. And I want to go through some things so you can think about the problem that you're trying to solve and give you a couple of newer strategies to figure out how to do this. And so what you want to do is you want to figure out what is the most compelling unmet clinical need, and sometimes that's challenging. So it's probably not the first thing you think of, or it's not the first thing that you observed. But you take that observation and you go back and you try to figure out where the sweet spot is. So is the problem protecting, inserting, securing all catheters? Is it securing umbilical venous catheters, inserting pediatric catheters? Where's the problem? And then you can also go upstream and downstream of your initial observation. So that means, are you trying to prevent CLABSIs in umbilical lines? Are you trying to diagnose them? Are you trying to identify or treat them? Or are you going on to do surveillance and management where you're monitoring line position? And you can choose any one of these that you want, but you want to make sure that you're choosing the most compelling unmet clinical need. And I can't say that enough, because you don't want to spend time solving a little problem in a little population, because then you're never going to have a sustainable business, okay? Got to have impact. And then in terms of the, another one for the problem, this is really hard for everyone. We are solution agnostic. You cannot think of a solution. If you think of a solution, I will know that you thought of a solution, and you will create a need statement around it, and it will show up there. So this looks subtle, but it really limits the range of potential opportunities that you have. So a way to prevent CLABSIs, okay, we're not all thinking of the same thing. Versus a way to remove bacteria colonization from umbilical catheters. That's like, okay, so we're thinking about how do we scrub that? How do we do that? That's probably something mechanical. We're not thinking about a digital solution. We're not thinking about a biologic necessarily. And it makes you start to think about a solution. Make sense? Okay. So then we think about the population. And of course, everybody wants to treat the biggest population possible, and your solution can be for everyone. But that's not true, because you can't solve anything that is for everyone. So as you increase your size of your population, you're also increasing the heterogeneity of that population and decreasing your ability to solve it. So you got to figure out where exactly that sweet spot is. And then, of course, outcome. Physicians care about, our satisfaction, but I guarantee that payers do not, especially in the US. And of course, we have a huge payer problem, which we won't get into because that'll take all day, but that's a different story that I'm thankful you guys have much less of an issue with. If you can address mortality, of course, that has higher value in reimbursement, and safety, productivity, and it kind of goes down the list. So think about your outcome, and it really has to relate to the stakeholder that is the decision maker. What do they care about most? And who's really that stakeholder? So this company came up with a way to, this is their first one, before they met me, a way to protect umbilical catheters in neonates in order to decrease CLABSIs, or central line associated bloodstream infections. Sounds good, right? You got a problem, population outcome, they're related, and you're trying to do something that's pretty impactful. There's a problem with it, but we'll get to that. So then what you do, and I'm combining an entire 10-month fellowship into a very small period of time. So forgive the large leaps that I'm making. You look at disease state fundamentals, existing solutions, market analysis, stakeholder analysis, and you don't just come up with one need. You come up with many, many needs, over 100, and then you have them compete with each other. And you come up with need criteria. So need criteria are super important because it tells your engineers how to make your device, but it also needs to be solution agnostic. So must-haves are things that you absolutely have to have to gain entry into the market, and nice-to-haves are things that are really market differentiators that blow things out of the water. And you want to look at things like efficacy, cost, safety, usability, all of those. And so they did all of this, and then they came up with this device. So this is their solution, and the video on the right is demonstrating how it actually works. This is a very simple solution, and I'm not saying that all pediatric device development needs to be simple. I also work for a company, Vitera, that's doing the artificial womb, and they just raised $135 million to help do that, so that is not simple at all. But this is fairly simple. So it secures the catheter, it protects the catheters, it keeps them from moving, it decreases migration, and it goes right into the standard of care that we're used to. So we've seen no CLABSIs on over 4,000 patients, and the migration rate is decreased at least 7-fold. And so we realized that if you're going to do a clinical study, CLABSIs don't happen very often. They only happen about 1.6% of the time. So a better outcome that was actually measurable and still impactful was to decrease umbilical line migration. And this is taking a very complex problem, this need statement, and distilling it down to the most important aspects, which allowed them to come up with a solution quite easily, working with nurses and physicians and everyone in our hospital as well. So we not only did this once, but we've done this again and again. And the way that we approach this as entrepreneurs and physicians as well is to take really impactful needs, go through that process, which is much longer and extensive than that, and then try to have something where we have low capital, ability to be acquired quickly, and have an exit so that we can have a larger company help accelerate that technology as well. And that tends to be our personal way of looking at it. It does not necessarily mean that that's the only way to do that. So we've done it more times than just Neonatal. But Neonatal raised a little bit over $1 million. They've treated over 4,000 patients, are in hospitals all around the US and hopefully coming to Europe soon. And they were acquired in 2023 by Labry, which is continuing to expand this NICU portfolio and really allows us to have a better sales force because it's actually really hard to sell one pediatric device to a lot of hospitals. And then a company that I created is called Emmy. It's a hardware software solution to manage life on birth control pills, which is a big problem because about 9% of women become unintentionally pregnant every year while on birth control pills just because they forget to take it. And we were able to solve that problem. We raised $3.5 million. It's commercially available, and it was acquired in 2022. And then another doctor at our institution who is a pediatric cardiologist, Brown and Harris, came up with a practical asthma monitoring system that puts a sensor under the bed and is able to identify asthma exacerbations early and decrease hospitalizations. They raised $1 million and were acquired by Apple. And then they're going on to develop that technology as well. So this is really possible. That's mostly what I'm trying to tell you. You can do this, and you can do this over and over again. And so we are doing this over again. So we incubate our own projects, but then we help accelerate projects, which we'll talk about in this next panel, from all around the world, because that is truly our passion. Without, any taking equity, financial commitments, nothing like that. We just really want to help individuals and programs and hospitals be able to advance technology and get them to pediatric patients. So this is one, because apparently in the US, fetal patients are not pediatric patients, so they don't qualify for the same type of funding. So fetal is basically forgotten. And there's a whole lot of political implications there, but we won't go into that. But sometimes when you have patients that actually have a bladder problem where they are not able to have urine pass out, you have to put in a shunt. Right now, you sometimes have to do that 7 to 8 times, and the baby still has issues, including poor lung development and potentially kidney disease after that. So they're developing a vortex shunt that actually stays in place, is kink resistant. They're in animal trials in Belgium right now. And so hopefully they'll be able to decrease this dislodgement and decrease the procedures that a pregnant mother has to have from 7 to 1 and actually be impactful. Another project we're working on is diagnosing early stage necrotizing enterocolitis. Premature patients often have a very high risk of having a gut condition that can kill them in very high rates of mortality and ongoing morbidity. But the issue is we know how to treat it, we just don't know how to detect it. So we found a way to analyze breath in order to be able to detect these cases at least 2 days earlier, which is gonna have a huge impact, which we're really excited about. And so that's almost ready for to spin out of the university. So we keep them in the university for at least 18 months, try to do the clinical trials, use all those resources, and then we're competitive for funding. Some of you may recognize Elizabeth Rosas, who is amazing and another one of my fellows. She has now gone on to, our fellows look in different places in the hospital every year, and this is our second year fellowship. There's lots of details there. They go on to be in the different centers of the hospital and develop innovations through that. So she spent her second year in the heme-onc wards, and she found that, now doctors would never tell you this, so it's really important to have observation, but oral mucositis is a horrible complication that specifically affects pediatric patients even more than adults, where you get horrible ulcers and mouth sores from chemotherapy because that skin is turning over most rapidly, and that's what chemotherapy targets. So she found a way to do a cryotherapy in the mouth while they're actually getting chemotherapy, much like the hats that people do to protect their hair, to then prevent and decrease the side effect. And we found ways to be able to do this where we can raise $50,000, be able to get that while in the university, get all of our IP, get it ready, do clinical studies, engineer basic prototypes to get it ready for venture funding or impact funding. So this is Impact 1. We're going to talk about this a little bit in the panel coming up. But this is my amazing team that I can never say enough about, led by myself and Koen Scheth, who's a pediatric urologist, supported by lots of lovely funding from the US FDA, as well as the Gates Foundation, Kobe Cure, and a bunch of philanthropic supporters. In the last 3 years, and it doesn't even really include this year, we've supported over 122 projects in 17 countries and 6 continents. We haven't gotten Antarctica yet, and Elizabeth really wants to get Antarctica, so if you know of any pediatric projects happening there, we would love to know. They're at any stage, and they're at any FDA classification. We're really proud to say that the founders are very diverse, with 34% being female, and also having persons of color being 28%. But these companies, since receiving our support, have treated over 32,000 patients, a number that I'd love to share with Josh Mackauer and say, see, we did this in only 2 years. And they've raised over $108 million. We haven't even surveyed them this year. Created over 214 jobs, and 2 companies acquired, but those were ours, so we'll throw those in there. And then we do provide additional funding, KOLs, consultants, connections, and meeting with the FDA too. So we are enthusiastic about creating new partnerships, as we have started to do in Europe, and come ask me if there's any partnerships you want to create, or if you have any questions.
I actually have one question.
Sure.
Because it just a short one. I don't know if you know probably Sheba Medical Center from Israel.
I do. I was just in Israel last year.
So they have the ARC, which is which they do kind of implement in different countries. Do you consider this as a maybe like a product that could be implemented somewhere else with the know-how and the framework that you just developed?
In terms of Stanford Biodesign, or are you talking about Impact 1 in general?
Impact 1, like this looks impressive as well, but the Stanford, but let's maybe do Impact 1.
Yeah, so I'll actually start with biodesign. So there's several different biodesign programs around the world, some of which are affiliated, many more that people have started and teach courses at. One of them being Israel Biodesign, so that's why I was out there a year ago. I do think that we need to come together as a community to support pediatric development, not just as a European community, but as a world community, because we have less patients who have these conditions. We have to collaborate in order to get enough patients through trials. And I can tell you, as a physician, I am super tired of using everything off-label. Nothing is approved for my patients. Literally no drugs I use are approved. No technologies are necessarily approved, very few of them, I should say. And that would never fly in the adult world. And so we need to come together to be able to change that and give physicians and parents and families information and understanding about, how risky is the technologies that we're providing for their children and the medications we're providing for their children as well. So I do think it's absolutely scalable, and we'd love to continue to partner and do that.